Hi, everyone. My name is Washington Silk. I use they, them pronouns, and I coordinate the OK2BME program.
Hi, my name is Mandy. My pronouns are they and she, and I am a therapist in the OK2BME program.
So OK2BME supports LGBTQ youth in Waterloo region. We normally go into your schools and would talk to you about the importance of LGBTQ allyship. But because it's 2020 and we can't do that anymore, we thought we'd make this video and come to you. So before we get started today, I want to do a land acknowledgement. So I'm sitting on the Haldeman track, which runs 10 kilometers either side of the Grand River. Pre-colonization, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Neutral people lived in this area. And when colonization happened, the Haldeman Tract Treaty promised almost 1 million acres on either side. Today, that treaty promise has been unfulfilled, and only 48,000 or less than 5% of that land belongs to the Indigenous people. So a land acknowledgement is a really important part that moves towards reconciliation and acknowledging the truth that happened in colonization. OK2BME provides service to LGBTQ folks in Waterloo region. This means we have counseling for folks between the age of 5 and 18 at no cost. We do provide counseling for folks older than the age of 18, but there might be a cost associated with it. Right now, we are providing virtual and phone counseling. Historically, and hopefully in the future, we will provide in-person counseling. We support GSAs getting started in schools, and we have weekly youth groups, which you can find out more on our website, ok2bme.ca, under the calendar function. You can see what we're up to every week, and you can join us. So a good place to start talking about is human rights. So this is where normally I'd ask you, like, what is a human right?
I could answer.
Yeah.
When I think of human rights, I think of if I think of what I probably would have thought of human rights in school, it would have been not being able to be mistreated or not being able to be abused, like making sure that people are all treated to the same standard. What do you think, Wash?
Well, Google tells me that in Canada, human rights are protected by federal, provincial, and territorial laws. They protect every Canadian to be treated equally under the law, and it guarantees broad equality rights and other fundamental rights, such as freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. So you might have heard me at the beginning being like, hey, we're going to talk about LGBTQ things, and you might know what the acronym means, and you might not know what the acronym means. So we're talking about gender and sexuality, and kind of like what that means in our everyday life and what that means for us and what that might mean for you. So I want to introduce you to the gender unicorn. The gender unicorn is my favorite unicorn. We hang out all the time, actually. And the gender unicorn breaks down ideas that we often conflate in society, which means that we don't really think about it, and we make up a lot of assumptions. So I'm going to walk you through it. The gender unicorn, the unicorn here is thinking of a rainbow. And that rainbow represents that unicorn's gender identity, their sense of being a man or a woman or something else. And everyone I have a gender identity. Everyone watching this presentation has a gender identity. It is unique to you. It's often based upon our culture and the time that we live in. So for example, what your grandma or your grandpa think it means to be a man, and maybe what your dad or your mom thinks it means to be a man, and what you think it means to be a man or a woman, those change over time, right? And then we have expression, and that's on the outside. It's kind of what people see and what we want people to see a little bit. It's how we talk, how we take up space, and that changes over time and situation. No one here is wearing the same outfit they did in grade 1, right? And if you are, kudos to you. Yeah, good job. And it changes over situation. And you can also see that it's on a spectrum. And a lot of it is really based on assumptions, right? About what male identified folks and female identified folks are supposed to look like. And then we have sex assigned at birth. So there are people who are assigned female at birth and people who are assigned male at birth. And then they're intersex folks. And they're not necessarily assigned intersex at birth because we don't really do a very good job of kind of keeping track of intersex folks, but there are a lot of different conditions that make somebody intersex. For example, if a body produces too much testosterone, your body actually turns it into estrogen. They're intersex animals. There's a really beautiful picture of an intersex robin that was half red, half white. I thought that was very cool. And statistically, With the exception of being in Ireland, redheaded people exist at the same rate as intersex people. So if you know someone who's naturally redheaded, you know someone who is intersex. And then we have who we're physically and emotionally attracted to, and we often think the same thing. But everyone here has probably had the experience where you like saw somebody and you're like, whoa, that person's really hot or really attractive. But then they talk to you and then you're like, oh no. And that's because there's no emotional attraction there. And for some people, these rank in different levels of importance, or people experience them differently. So for example, about 1% of the population identifies as asexual, which means they don't really experience a lot of sexual attraction, but they might experience romantic attraction or biromantic attraction.
I think one thing that's really interesting to think about is how, you know, we change and grow as people, and our understanding of how these things exist within ourselves and how they're a part of our identity can change over time. We might use different language, or we might understand them differently. So, you know, you might have someone who identifies one way at a particular point in their life, and then later in their life, that might be something that they reflect on a little bit differently. So these are concepts that can change and grow as a person changes and grows.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, like I was assigned female at birth and I identify as a transmasculine person. And so I'd kind of be like further on the male spectrum, but I wouldn't say a trans man because I don't like all the assumptions that come with being a man. So for example, when I told my dad that I was transgender, he was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And then he was like, so now you're gonna have to learn how to fix a car, because to my dad, like, this is something that's really important that like men know how to do. This is key to masculinity, being able to fix cars, right? And I am terrible at fixing things. Everyone that knows me will tell you that, like, no one should ever get into a car that I fix. We'll all die. Rather dramatic deaths. Right? And so like, I don't like those assumptions that are put on us. And you might see that other line below male there. And like, there are lots of different cultures and times where like people's gender identity and expression have been totally outside of the binary of male and female, right? So if you were in Samoa, it might be Fa'afenina, for example. In North America, people might identify as two-spirit, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But those are examples of gender identities that are not male or female. We're going to go over some LGBTQ 2+ terms, and you might have heard lots of different acronyms. So this is the one that we use. So it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, two-spirit. And then there's a plus because there's lots of other identities that are kind of hard to encompass here. So we're going to go over some key terms. So you might notice a rainbow umbrella in the middle. So an umbrella term means that there's like a key term, and there's lots of other things that fall under that term. So one of them might be transgender or gay. So gay is an umbrella term that is often used for people of same-sex attractions, but there's lots of different kind of individual words like lesbian or bisexual or asexual or queer that would fall under that. Transgender is also an umbrella term. And if you hadn't heard the word transgender before, trans, the Latin root of that word means on the other side. To me, it means a journey has happened. So I picture a river in my head, to be honest, where I had to cross the river. So my sex assigned at birth matched my gender identity, a little like journey that happened. So I could feel right. Cisgender means on the same side. So that means that no journey has happened, no river needed to be crossed. So that means if my sex assigned at birth matched my gender identity, I would be cisgender. Those are really important terms to know, because you don't want to have like normal people and then trans people, because reality is none of us are normal. As my grandma says, normal is just a setting on the dryer. And since transgender is an umbrella term, there's lots of words that fit under it. So for example, non-binary, agender, and bigender. So non-binary, a non-binary trans person might feel like their gender identity does not match the binary kind of cultural norms or ideals around being a man or a woman, or they may not feel like male or female. Agender is a person who might not feel like they have a gender identity at all. Bigender might be someone who feels like they have both a male and female gender identity. Gender queer might mean someone who's rejecting the notion of cisgender or binary ideals around gender. So you see the word queer here a lot. So queer has historically been used as a slur against LGBTQ people and has been reclaimed. So some people feel uncomfortable with that term still. If someone uses the term queer, then you can use the term queer. And really, like, if someone's using a term for themselves, you should use that same term for them and be respectful. If someone says bisexual, you use bisexual. If someone says queer, you use queer, for example. And then gender creative and gender independent are words that we use for young people who maybe haven't gone through puberty yet, whose gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth. And then on the other side, so you will notice again that, like, I have these divided in two different categories: gender identity, which I just did, and the other side is sexuality. People think they're the same thing and they're not. So a good way to separate them in your head is gender identity is who you go to bed as, it is who you are. Everyone has a gender identity. And sexuality is who you wish you could go to bed with, right? And everyone has a sexuality too. And there's way more than what's on this list. So I'm going to refer you to our definitions page. But these are just a couple that are more common that we want to share with you. So gay is historically used for men who are attracted to other men, lesbian for women or female identified folks who are attracted to other women. Bisexual has historically meant someone who's attracted to both men and women, but there are more than two biological sexes. There are more than two gender identities. So what does this really mean? And so bisexual sort of come to mean that you like your own gender and another gender. So I could say I'm bisexual because I like, or I'm attracted to other trans people and women, for example. Asexual, someone about 1% of the population, but someone who doesn't experience strong or any sexual attraction towards other people. There's a lot of information and thoughtfulness within that identity that I would encourage you to look up. For example, like demisexual or gray sexual, and then queer again. So queer in many ways just means not straight. Pansexual was just added to the dictionary last year. Very exciting. It is not someone who's attracted to pans, but somebody who, pan means many, right? So someone who's attracted to many people, mostly for who they are, right? Not necessarily for what's between their legs, but the kind of connection that you have with somebody. And then straight, someone who's attracted to somebody of the opposite gender. You will notice in the middle that I have queer and two-spirit there. And because two-spirit does not fit necessarily into the binary of gender identity or sexuality that I've separated them out as. So two-spirit is an Indigenous term that developed in the 1990s from Indigenous communities to reclaim that identity. We will learn more about two-spirit people in a little bit more, but the idea of two-spirit that's been communicated to me by two different elders. There's one definition of somebody who has both a male and female spirit. And then another definition from another elder that I heard is that somebody has a gender, or somebody's spirit walks in this world and the next world. You only people of First Nations identities can identify as two-spirit. So just like in your head right now, percentage-wise, if you were to guess how many LGBTQ folks live in Ontario, what would you guess? 1%, 2%? What would you guess, Mandy?
80%.
80%, 100%. Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too, 100%, perfect. So what do we actually know? This is kind of a trick question because we don't really know the answer. And we have some research. So it's kind of suggested that 1 in 5 people, or research that was done in Canadian high schools said about 1 in 7, so that's 14%. Research done by Vice magazine, so super legit, you know. Said that 48% of 20 to 13-year-olds identifies exclusively heterosexual, which means 52% of people are not exclusively heterosexual. When we look at the states, they have data by age, and you can see that they think it's overall 12% of the population, but it's really high for young people, and then it gets smaller as they get older. And I hope people take a second to think, okay, why does it get smaller as people age? And that's a really important question. So one, it might be that people don't feel safe identifying as LGBTQ, or they don't even know that that term like kind of fits with their experience because they weren't educated about it, or they didn't feel like they had the human rights at that time to like back up their experience. So they're in some ways kind of in the closet. It could also be that there's a generation of people missing in this data who died in the HIV/AIDS crisis. It's really important. And then we talk about trans people. So a study was done in Ontario that suggested about 1 in 200 people, about 0.5% of the population is transgender. It likely actually is about 1 in 100 people, which research that has been updated from 2014 is sort of indicating. But I remember when I learned this, it blew my mind. I kind of thought that I was alone in who I was. and learning that like at minimum 1 in 200 people are like me, that was really important for me to know. And I hope it's important for you to know. All right, everybody, quiz question time. First question, when was gay marriage legalized in Canada?
I'm going to say 1995.
Growing up, did you think that you could marry a same-sex partner? Like, was that in your head?
I never thought that that would be possible. I never thought that would be possible for me.
How'd you feel about that?
It was a really difficult thing. I think that that contributed to me not coming out for a really long time.
Yeah. Yeah. So gay marriage was legalized in 2005. So if anyone had that, good job. But that is around the time when I graduated high school. And I remember graduating and being like, oh my God, my life can start now. Like this, I can actually get married. So in what year was being gay punishable by death in Canada? The answer, in 1841, the Canadian Criminal Code imposes the death penalty for persons engaging in same-sex relationships. And speaking of recent history, what year did transgender people receive human rights protection under the Canadian law?
I'm going to try to remember this from memory. I think it was 2017.
2017. Oh, look at that. Nailed it, Mandy. In 2017, Canada would add protections of gender identity and gender expression in our Human Rights Code. And so this is really important. This affects our penal system. This affects our healthcare. This affects our education system. What else does it affect? Our data collection and census. What else?
Also important things like housing, not being turned away from housing or employment because of the way you express your gender or because you're trans.
Very important things. All right, in what year did Waterloo Region have its first Pride celebration?
I will share what I hear people in classrooms guess when they are asked this question.
Okay.
I often hear that they guess either 2005 or 2017.
Wow, okay. None of those kids are right. 1995.
1995. I was 5 years old. I think it's really interesting that when people hear that information, they hear it's 1995. It's been a long time in this region. Often they ask me, you know, Mandy, how is it possible that we could be having a Pride celebration if this was still legal? And they're looking at questions still illegal. They're looking at questions 1 and 3 and wondering how could we have Pride celebrations when we didn't have fully protected legal rights? And I often talk about the importance of knowing that the first ever Pride celebration was actually a riot, and historically LGBTQ people have had to fight really hard for their rights. And so that is actually the roots of Pride and celebration. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, so in Montreal, people were rounded up for being involved in gay bars and by the police and incarcerated. And that evening and the next day, some of the largest protests in Canada around gay pride happened, resulting in Quebec being the second place in the world after the Netherlands to legalize same-sex rights. And there's lots of LGBTQ things happening in Waterloo Region over the years. So Waterloo Region, for example, had one of the first university clubs at the University of Waterloo. We had a gay radio station that was national, very cool. So if you'd like to know more about LGBTQ history in Waterloo Region, we're going to include a link below to the Grand River Historical Rainbow Project. So I think when we talk about LGBTQ issues, it's impossible not to talk about gender stereotypes. Do people know what a stereotype is?
I think a stereotype means like assumptions that we make about people based on our judgment of them.
Yeah, and everyone makes assumptions about other people, right? You look at somebody for a couple seconds and you think that you might know something about them. We all do it, and we all do it around gender. So I would like to share some stereotypes around gender that I think are a little bit silly. So the first one is that boys aren't allowed to show emotions. You know, and everyone I'm here listening to this, or everyone listening to this probably has heard like, walk it off, don't cry, don't be a sissy, right? I've heard these things being said to people. And then a side note, as a mental health professional, do you know what happens when we get stress hormone in our brain?
Bad things.
Bad things. Yeah. So I don't know if you've ever been in a fight with somebody and you go to say an important point, but you get kind of like dumb. You like forget what you were going to say and the words don't come out right. And you get like, feel a little bit like foggy, like you can't think through things clearly. So that stress hormone in our brain called cortisol, it is no good for us. And one of the ways that it leaves our body is by crying. Like you can literally see it in our tears, right? So when people are not able to cry, that is a really big deal because they're not able to kind of like help themselves recover from being in that amount of stress. So when you're saying like, you know, don't cry, walk it off, don't be a sissy, you're like, okay, cool, but marinate your brain in some toxic stress and then somehow magically feel better, because that's what being a man's all about, you know? Which it's not. Like these are just stereotypes that we don't have to live with. So the next one I want to draw your attention to is a retail ad. So if you've ever been to a store that maybe sells toys or clothes, you kind of notice that like it's gendered, right? We have a boys and a girls section, and especially toys. Like we kind of toys aisle, it's like the pink aisle, and then like all of a sudden the everything else aisle. And this is a retail ad that is from Sweden, and you can see that Spider-Man is pushing a baby carriage, and what looks like a young girl is riding a little tractor toy. And we wouldn't normally see that here because the way we think about things are very gendered. And the next thing I have up is high heels. Why would I have a high heel up here, do you think, Mandi?
It's really pretty.
It's really pretty, yeah. Typically worn by
women,
right? A sign of femininity. But if you look at history says that high heels are actually originally invented and worn by men. We have King Louis XIV here rocking some really awesome high heels. So high heels were originally invented, worn by men. And then actually some women started wearing high heels to appear more masculine, and men stopped wearing those high heels because they didn't want to be associated with those women. Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting.
Yeah. And then if I were to say right now, pink is a what color? What would most people say?
Feminine.
Yeah. And blue is a what color?
Masculine.
Yeah, but that wasn't always so. So we have in Ladies' Home Journal, in 1918, they talked about how generally pink is considered to be for boys and blue is for girls. That pink is a decidedly stronger color, and it's more suitable to boys, and blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier and for girls, right? You can see that a lot of these things that we kind of cling to that says boys do this or girls do that, like they're not really true. They're just stories we tell ourselves. And then I also have a really awesome picture of the future president of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Most people would see that and assume that person was assigned female at birth, right? But it was actually really common for young boys to dress this way, particularly in formal occasions. That was considered really normal. And stereotypes can be really, really harmful because they don't really allow people to be themselves. They don't allow people to be themselves. They shut down our ability to get to know people, and they don't really ever help us grow as humans and to like set them aside. So some assumptions and stereotypes in the LGBTQ community is that people choose to become lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. That it is something new or popular to do, or that you can tell somebody is gay or trans or bi by looking at them. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mandi?
I know that I definitely heard all of these stereotypes when I was growing up, and there are also things that influenced me not feeling like I could tell people what I was thinking and what I was feeling, or, you know, that people in my life that I trusted wouldn't be able to understand or wouldn't support or respect me anymore.
Totally. I used to have these silly rules in my head where if I wear like a masculine or like male clothes, then I had to wear some female clothes to like balance it out, because then people would like know, they would, from stereotypes, right? So like if I wore like boy shirts, I had to wear a girl top because I was so worried about people making these assumptions because they wouldn't get to know me first. And this has happened to me too, right? Like I've had very close people in my life who've come out as gay later on in life. And And I had no idea. Because, you know, they were like butch construction workers. And I'm like, oh, that's not what gay men look like, right? Which is not at all the case. So there's like a little meme here, which I think makes a really good point. So it says, I suddenly woke up one morning and decided that I should pretend to be a man for the rest of my life and deal with the social and physical harassment, psychological turmoil, and be disowned by my family and spend thousands of dollars just because I can. None of these things are a choice. The only choice you have is who you tell and how you live your life. But in terms of who we are, that's just who we are. So coming out. What is coming out?
Coming out of the closet, telling people
Boom.
who you are. Bam!
Yeah, and often it doesn't happen more than once. Coming out can be a really vulnerable experience. And sometimes it happens in gym class, and then English class, and then to your grandma, and then to your friends. And it can be an ongoing process. And sometimes people talk about a closet within a closet, because once you spend some time getting to know yourself, and you're like, okay, like maybe I'm bi, like I kind of like, you know, guys and girls, or trans people and girls. And then you're like, oh wait, this gender thing, what about that, right? Or things change as you evolve and you get to know yourself. We talked about before that the idea of being trans, like there's this assumption or stereotype that it is a new thing. And so this is a PBS map. We can include the link for you to check out later. It's kind of like an Anthro Gender 101, but these are times in history where trans people or non-binary people have been an accepted and celebrated or recognized part of the culture and time. This is not something new. Trans people have always been here. So speaking of human diversity, one of the ones you might be familiar with is Two-Spirit people. We talked about that before. So prior to European colonization, lots of different indigenous groups had people outside of the binary of male and female that were really recognized and celebrated as important people. They might have been leaders in the community. They might have been healers. They might have been mediators. And when colonization happened, they intentionally targeted Two-Spirit people, murdering them because of their important status and because their gender and sexuality norms are outside of what the colonial names were. So there's a picture right here of a very famous Two-Spirit person named Wiwa. We will post a link so you can learn more about her history. So I really encourage everybody to learn more about Wiwa and Wiwa's experience in history. And I would argue that she should definitely be in our history books. So what did you learn in school today? You might have learned a little bit about math. You might have learned a little bit about science or history. But the things that aren't in your textbook, you're still learning, right? And you might have learned that homophobia and transphobia is okay. That is just a funny thing to say. That's so gay. So we know that 70% of students report hearing that's so gay. They report hearing homophobic and transphobic slurs. And that people actually also report being physically or sexually harassed in schools. This should not be part of our school curriculum, right? For trans kids, it can get a little bit higher. So that 79% of trans people, trans students feel unsafe going to school. 74% of them have experienced verbal harassment. 49, so just under half have been sexually harassed at school, and 37% have been physically assaulted, right? This is not what people should be learning in school. So what can we do about this? So there's a really great link called nohomophobes.com, but you can find out how many homophobic tweets there have been a day. So when people have tweeted, how many times today have they tweeted faggot or no homo or so gay or dyke, right? Is anyone surprised by the results? I'm not surprised. So this happens all the time. So the most unsafe places in schools were change rooms, washrooms, and hallways. Why do you think those places, change rooms, washrooms, and hallways?
I think they all have something very important in common.
Yeah, which is what?
There's no adults there.
Yeah. I once had a kid be like, yeah, because there's nobody there. And I'm like, what do you mean nobody? You're there. And they're like, oh no, I mean teachers. Like they like somehow think that they're not people, right? And they're like, we are people. You can do something about this, right? And so, because there's no teachers there, which means the only people that can make a difference are the young people. So I want to introduce you to this idea of Upstander intervention. So I'm sure people have heard the word bystander, where you see something happen and you're just a bystander and you're not really involved. So the idea is that you take action and you don't be a bystander, and there's lots of different ways to do that. So if we were here in a classroom, I would brainstorm ideas, but it's just Mandi and me hanging out. So Mandi, do you have any ideas?
Well, you can say something. You
Mm-hmm.
can say, that's not cool. I don't appreciate when you say that.
Yeah.
You can check in on the person who experienced the behavior and ask if they're okay or if they need anything.
So if I saw something I didn't feel safe and I was like a little bit too shy to stand up for that situation, I could wait till the bully leaves, and then I could be like, hey, Mandi, whatever happened there, I saw that and that was super uncool, and I'm sorry that happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you need anything?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? What else could happen?
You could go and tell a trusted teacher or staff person at school about what happened, and ask for them to offer support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I noticed, so I've been doing these talks in schools from probably grade 3 to grade 12 pretty often. One thing that I notice is that the younger kids, probably until about grade 7, really are like, yes, we should say something and I will say something. And they have a lot more confidence in doing that. And then something happens around grade 7 to 12 where people kind of lose that confidence and they're like, oh, that's not my business, or I don't want to get involved in that, or I don't want to be seen as being uncool. Why do you think that happens?
Well, if I look at, what school was like for me between, grade 8 and grade 12, it was a time in my life where the opinions of my peers mattered the most to me.
Yeah.
And I was probably not as confident in myself as I am now.
But you're right. And like what people think about other people and what you want them to think about matters so much, right? And so to me, that says you have power, right? Other people care about what you think. And it can be very hard to stand up for what you believe in. And so there might be small ways you can do it, like conversations with friends and challenging their ideas. You can also ask your teachers to include LGBTQ content in the curriculum. So if you're looking at short stories, why can't we look at like an LGBTQ short story? And like also recognize that it is actually quite difficult and hard. So there are going to be some days where you feel like you have the energy and the ability to stand up and challenge these things, and other days you're going to feel like you're just surviving. And I really think that like a lot of times this falls on LGBTQ people to say something, and really that takes a lot of energy and a lot of time, and that's where allies come in. Like allies who are people who like maybe don't deal with the same stressors every day. They're able to come in and say and stand up when and like take that kind of pressure and load off of saying like, hey, that's not okay, you know? So what does homophobia or transphobia feel like? So we're not going to play it here, but we recommend watching the movie All You Need Is Love. So we're going to link it below with some debrief questions to ask with your class or to ask yourself. And it's a movie where the world is turned upside down, where everybody is gay except for this one kid who's straight. And we're going to look at her experience and see what that's like. I highly recommend it. Okay. So I hope you took a break and you watched the movie. I'm wondering what that was like for you. I'm wondering, the debrief questions are below, so were you afraid for her? What did you think? What did you notice? What were your reactions? I would love to hear from them if you ever wanted to share. But let's go back to you. What can you do? What are things that we can all do to be allies? So allyship is not a noun, it's a verb. It's about action, it's about doing. So allies are supportive, they listen to their friends and their community. They find books or content that represent LGBTQ folks. For a long time, the only content available that represent LGBTQ folks was just tragic. Like everyone would have a really sad ending, people would die, people would break up. And even then, that content was rare, right? And so now that content is becoming part of our normal everyday life, and that is a new thing, right? And if you are a straight person and you don't know any LGBTQ folks, and all the media and all the games and all the books that you read don't have LGBTQ folks or in them, then you kind of like have this worldview that has blinders on and you're not able to see everybody that's in it. So I would encourage you to go out of your way and pick up a book, play a game, watch a movie that has LGBTQ content. You can educate yourself on the subject. So that might be, so if you don't know what all those letters in the acronym mean, that might mean looking it up. It might mean talking to someone in OK2BME if you want to learn more. It might mean that in your history project, you say, you know, I'm going to learn about the history of LGBTQ folks in World War II, which is very important, by the way. You're going to stand up when you hear homo, bi, transphobia comments, if you feel capable, if you're safe. And then really you want to ask yourself, if I was a gay person, a lesbian person, a trans person, would I feel comfortable here? And if the answer is no, what would make you feel more comfortable? Take a look around and think about that. So allies are not bystanders. They don't make assumptions. They don't ask intrusive personal questions. They're not afraid to ask for support. And they don't accept hate and being uncomfortable as normal. And they think, or they don't think that it has nothing to do with them. Does that make sense? Is there any reflections that you would want to share, Mandi?
I think that if I had more allies when I went to school, it would have been a much easier experience for me.
Oh my gosh, me too. I remember 10 years later talking to one of my friends online. It was like my high school best buddy. And I was like, oh, by the way, I'm gay. And I was so terrified to tell them. And they were like, oh, yeah, like we know. And I'm like, what do you mean you knew? Like you always knew? Why didn't you say something? And they're like, well, we kind of thought it was your business. But I was like, I didn't tell you because I was so terrified of losing you as a friend. It would have made all the difference to know that you were an ally and had my back. It was kind of like a light bulb moment for both of us. So I want to show you a really cool graph, okay, for people that don't think their allyship matters. So where do students get support? So this is a survey that was done in the Waterloo region with high school students, okay? This is real data, okay? I want everyone to draw their eyes to parents. So blue is trans people, orange is gay, lesbian, bisexual people. There might be other people in that category too, as well as asexual. Okay, so draw your eyes to parents. So people get the least amount of support sometimes at home, and they get the most support from their LGBTQ friends, their straight friends, and their teachers at school. Mm. Being an ally matters so much. I hope everyone takes a moment right now to reflect on who's in their life and how they can be an ally to them. So schools, I don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic, but schools often have GSAs. They stand for Gay Straight Alliances or Gender and Sexuality Awareness Clubs. And these clubs are meant to do kind of two different things, provide a safe place for LGBTQ students, but also create an environment where people can help educate and advocate for fairness, equality, and equity in their life, right? So it helps educate themselves in the larger school. It is a social network. It empowers LGBTQ youth and their allies, and it makes the invisible visible. So if your school has a GSA, you can join as an ally or a member of the LGBTQ community. They would love to have you. Every year in February, we have a GSA conference, which 200 plus kids get to come to. It's an amazing day, and we hope to see you there. GSA is really important. So when schools have policies, when they have teachers that care, when kids are invested in creating an environment where people are safe, GSAs help reduce homophobic discrimination by up to 50%. The LGBTQ youth have better mental health. And in fact, everybody feels better. So research also suggested that straight, so that's heterosexual boys, were 50% more likely to have improved mental health. Why do you think that is, Mandi?
I think that, you know, if GSAs make the invisible visible, it just allows people to challenge their assumptions and their biases and their stereotypes and just be more open-minded.
Yeah, I think that for young men in particular, there's a lot of pressure to behave and be a certain way, right? Block it off, suck it up, don't cry, right? I think it takes the pressure off and saying, you know what, this is not about gender stereotypes. This is about us taking the time and learning how we want to be, who we are, and what kind of adults we want to be. And this is all about what high school is, right? This is a time of differentiation, figuring out how you're separate from your parents, also how you're the same, what kind of life you want to have, what your values, how you want to grow up to be. And I think having these conversations is incredibly important to figure out what that means for you. And that includes everybody, LGBTQ folks, straight folks, trans folks, cisgender folks. We all need time and space to do that. So we got to give ourselves the time and space to do that. This is one of my favorite posters. It says most people go their whole lives figuring out who they are. So why do we expect trans people to know themselves precisely before allowing them to explore their identity? Trans people get this a lot. I got this a lot. How can you be sure? How can you know? And it's a lot to ask people to be 100% sure. But what it's not a lot to ask is, okay, this is a really important conversation. How do I honor this? How do I figure out what this means for you? And that means, though, if you have a friend that comes to school and says like, hey, you know, I'm transgender, and the next day they're like, actually I'm not, like, that's an okay and valid thing to happen. Like, people are allowed to explore, people are allowed to express their feelings, people are allowed to change their mind. Everybody has a chance to learn and grow and figure out who they are. Everyone needs that. So these are local programs that support LGBTQ youth. We're going to add more links to that below, so you can click on links in the area if you are looking for more resources and support. There's going to be supports for families. If you have any questions, please email OK2BME at kwcounselling.com. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.